Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Friday, we've come to the end of a week. We're still in this soup bowl of humidity, and we've had some pretty strong thunderstorms that rolled through parts of my area and now are moving their way up into New England. I'm going to do the local weather second. I want to do the tropics first. We're going to look at Hurricane Hector in the Pacific. Excuse me. And we're going to look at the tropical Atlantic as well, and you'll see the difference in terms of the activity that's going on. But definitely going to see some changes in the upper air pattern going forward. So that's kind of the broad view here of where we're at weather-wise. And let's get going. By the way, Johnny Quest, you said you might have a disaster in the making. I assume you're talking about where you are with respect to all the rains that you've gotten. If you give me a little bit more detail on what you mean, that would be great. Okay, so let's move on to Hurricane Hector. And here's a visible satellite loop from this afternoon. Thank you, by the way, to Levi Cowan and Tropical Tidbits for all the wonderful things that you provide on your website at tropicaltidbits.com. One of the things we've noticed here with regards to Hector is that after weakening a bit, and this was not unexpected per the Hurricane Center, we are seeing the eye becoming much better defined during this afternoon. And you can see it there on the last several frames that it's definitely getting better organized again, and top winds are 105 miles an hour. Moving along to the west, the eye of the hurricane is just north of 14 degrees north, and it just crossed the 130-degree west line. It still has a bit of a ways to go before it becomes under the jurisdiction of Hawaii and the National Weather Service there. Right now still being watched and forecasted by Miami. But we continue to see the idea here that Hector is probably going to hold on to hurricane status much of the way as it moves westward. It'll probably become a major hurricane either tomorrow or I think at the latest tomorrow night. And if you look how well the eye, how much better organized it is from today, it may actually, it might even reach major hurricane status by Saturday morning. I think it's going to make a close call to Hawaii. Model trends have been to the south in the last several runs. We're going to look at all of that in just a second, but definitely getting better organized there. Top winds on the last advisory from the Hurricane Center at 105 miles an hour. And you can see it here on their forecast map. This was as of the advisory that was issued at 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time or 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 14.1 north and 129.8 west. So since then, moved right across that 130 degrees west line, moving west to 12. The Hurricane Center pointed out in their overnight discussion that the westward movement was a bit slower than what they were forecasting earlier, and that this was important because this could mean that Hector might be impacted by a trough to its north and perhaps make a west-northwest turn sooner. That may have implications on where it winds up in the longer haul. This is their forecast going out 120 hours. You can see the Hurricane Center has it passing the distance between the south shore of the Big Island of Hawaii and where they have it positioned. That's about 150 miles. This is a very, very small storm. If you look at it here on the satellite loop, it's not quite as small as Beryl was, but on the Atlantic back in early July. But if you look at where the southern edge of the cloud line is and the northern edge, I mean, we're just basically talking about 13 to 15 degrees. This is only about 150 miles across from south to north. This is a rather small hurricane, and these small systems, they tend to do strange things. They intensify very rapidly, and they also can weaken just as fast, and sometimes you think that they're in environments where they should weaken and they don't. We saw that with Beryl. Other times we think they're in environments where they look like they're going to strengthen and they don't. So it's a very, very volatile situation here, but everything upstream at least points to the fact that it will be able to strengthen to a major hurricane. It's moving into an area of very warm water temperatures, and that will be supportive, and also very light wind shear. So those two features suggest that we are going to see this strengthen to a major hurricane. Now, this is the model track guidance, the different hurricane model track guidance that's out there. One of the things that struck me is, you know, all of us have seen those spaghetti plot maps and the jokes that some people have where they show the map where the tracks are in all sorts of crazy directions, especially once you get beyond 96 and 120 hours. What's remarkable here to me is the fact that the tracks are tightly clustered. Virtually all the models now have this going south of the big island of Hawaii, and if you want to take kind of an average track, it's pretty much where the Hurricane Center has laid its forecast. When you see the track models clustered like this, there's a higher degree of confidence in where this is going to wind up in the longer term. And the trend in the last several runs has been further south. Now, of course, this could change. It doesn't necessarily mean that that this is going to be correct out on days 4 and 5, but you can see the difference from the furthest south to the furthest north is not a whole lot. The tight cluster, again, inspires confidence, a higher degree of confidence in the forecast. But either way, it is going to be coming perilously close to the Hawaiian Islands. And in terms of intensity, and this is the other big question that we have with regards to these storms, because as I've been saying the last couple of days, we've seen hurricanes come out of the East Pacific and move across, and then something happens when they get west of 150 west. Either they run into strong wind shear, or they run into a cooler Pacific Ocean water, especially as they get a little higher in latitude. And Hawaii gets spared a lot of the time from major hurricane hits. So, you know, I'm going to watch. You know, we're going to watch this with great interest to see how this system behaves once it gets out to about 150 west, which it will do early next week. Now, the different intensity model, the intensity model guidance, you'll notice that they all have it at the very least as a tropical storm. Only all but 2 have it at least as a hurricane, and there are a cluster of them that are sitting in the Category 2 to borderline Category 3 hurricane, more closer probably to the lower end of Category 2, and then you start to see some models that have it as Category 3, and we even have one that strengthens it to a Category 4 and just basically leaves it there out at day 5 and day 6. But this at least looks like it's going to hold on to a good chunk of its strength. And I've seen them, by the way, go from hurricane to nothing by the time they go from 150 west, so they get out to south of the Big Island, and you're left with basically either a minimal tropical storm or a tropical depression because of strong wind shear or any a bunch of other factors that could cause the system to weaken. So nothing would surprise me. But this time around, at least from the standpoint of the ocean water temperatures in the Pacific, they are running above average in that area, so they might be a bit more supportive. Also, the GFS ensembles, very, very tightly clustered. Most of them, it looks like all of the members, except for 1 or 2 of them, seem to cross it over the big island of Hawaii and then taking it south of the rest of the islands. The vast majority of the members have it going south of the big island and on a steady course toward the west. And you can see it actually starts to go more west-northwest once it gets out to about 180 degrees west, the international date line. The GFS actually holds this together as a hurricane crossing the international date line. Once it does that, by the way, it gets a name change when it gets to the other when it crosses the date line, and it goes to the next weather service that's out to the west of Hawaii. So here we have the GFS from today, and as I said, the model trends have been further south, further south. The GFS from earlier today, taking it just south of actually it takes it south of the Big Island by a fair distance, and because remember, if this were talking about a small storm, only 120 or 150 miles across, it could come close to the island and they may not experience very much. This is at 16, where I have the L, it's at 16.2, I'm sorry, 16.7 and 155 west. The southernmost part of the Big Island is at about 19.2 and 155. So we're talking about 2.5 degrees, 150 miles from the southern tip of the Big Island to where the eye of this hurricane might be. And it's quite possible that that 150-mile distance, that Hawaii wouldn't experience much in the way of inclement weather out of this. The hurricane passes well south of the other islands by well over a couple of hundred miles. This will obviously rough up the ocean, but in terms of land impacts, they would be minimal if this track holds. And as it goes from there west-northwestward, it crosses the international date line at 180 degrees west and still maintaining hurricane strength, Category 2 strength on the GFS all the way through, and then eventually starts to turn it more north-northwest once it gets to about 175 degrees east. Amazing. We don't see them do that very often. And this one, I've seen it happen where they formed in the Central Pacific and then move west or west-northwestward across the date line. But it's not often. I don't recall one that started off the coast on the East Pacific, off the coast of Baja and Mexico from the initial disturbance, and ride itself all the way across. I'm sure it had. I'm thinking back to possibly Hurricane John. I don't even quite remember what year, but that was a hurricane that I think it was the longest lasting on the East Pacific side. I'm wondering if my memory is serving me incorrectly here, that John wound up moving across and then eventually over the date line. But it does happen. And the key to the forecast with respect to Hector, once again, is going to be this big upper high that is sitting off of north of Hawaii, and on the last couple of runs, that upper high has become stronger, and this is probably the reason why it's taking it on a westerly track longer and taking it south of the islands. You see how the eye is enveloped around? Here's where your hurricane is at this point on the map. It's at 16.5 and 157.5. A big upper high just kind of envelopes around it. It's keeping it from making a turn more toward the north and responding to weaknesses in the flow that exist to the northwest and to the northeast of it. The Hurricane Center was thinking that, well, perhaps if it's moving slower, when we look here into Monday morning, there is a bit of a weakness from a deep trough out in the northeast Pacific, but the problem is that the ridge in the Pacific here is building rather strongly, and there's just a narrow brick wall in between the troughing to the north and the hurricane to the south, and it's keeping it on more of a westerly course and actually turns it more westerly as the ridge strengthens north of Hawaii. That is really going to be key here, folks. That upper ridge that's north of the Hawaiian Islands will ultimately either shield the Hawaiian Islands from any kind of direct impact, or if that ridge is overdone, you could wind up with some impact. The European model, by the way, is very similar to the GFS, and in fact, it actually would argue, here it is on the European. The European shows you that small system responding to the ridge and actually takes it a bit further south than what the GFS did, and also the European takes it out across the international date line at 240 hours. So it has it as a hurricane going into the West Pacific, and it would get a name change. So both models hold on to this as a very, very a relatively potent tropical cyclone as it moves westward. Where it, does it survive, the trip across? It seems to, the models seem to be saying that the wind shear conditions are not going to be getting in the way, and that this will probably survive a trip all the way across and over the international date line to, quote unquote, let's call it the other side. Okay, now off to the Atlantic, and we are still in quiet mode here. You can see on the visible loop the Saharan dust that is evident across much of the tropical and even into the subtropical Atlantic, the anemic intertropical convergence zone, although we do have some activity off the African coast, but the upper air conditions across the Atlantic continue to remain fairly hostile for tropical storm development. We did notice, by the way, that the European model does seem to have, and this is, I'm not really holding my breath on this at all. It did today have a rather vibrant looking wave coming off the African coast at around day 9, but it's too far out in the long range. By the way, if you look in the eastern Gulf and in the Northwest Caribbean, we have a very large upper low here spinning away, and that is creating wind shear conditions across the Caribbean, stronger winds than normal. You've got this strong upper low in the Atlantic out at about 35 degrees north, and its influence extends down into the subtropics. Strong upper level winds here creating hostile conditions. So there really doesn't appear to be much room for any kind of tropical storm formation on the Atlantic side until we can rearrange the chess pieces here, and it may take a while for that to happen. Now, let's go to the weather here in the eastern part of the United States, because that has become a problem today. I'm going to refresh this radar. We actually had a tornado warning that was issued for parts of central Massachusetts and Worcester County a little while ago. We are at 6:15 Eastern time, so please be advised that I'm referencing something here that happened earlier. If you are watching this on a replay, you are obviously seeing dated radar, so you want to check with your local National Weather Service office, and you can access that at weather.gov for what will likely be other severe warnings that will be coming out later this evening and tonight, and maybe even for the first part of Saturday. The thunderstorms actually ran through New Jersey with some severe weather earlier today. We've had some flash flooding going on in parts of the Middle Hudson Valley and also in parts of northeastern Pennsylvania. The area of downpours and thunderstorms now moving through eastern Virginia is notable because of the fact that the back edge of this marks the final round of downpours, and we're making eastward progress here with the upper trough, and that's good news because that means that we are going to see improving weather conditions gradually over the weekend. We just have to work through this last round of downpours, and that's going to come through the Northeast on Saturday. For my area, and areas from west of New York City, there's a possibility that we could see improving weather conditions Saturday afternoon, but for sure, Sunday, the better of the 2 weekend days. Other thunderstorms this evening in the southeast and across the Gulf states, which is what you would expect. We're seeing some monsoon action in parts of Arizona and New Mexico, and some downpours and thunderstorms through Colorado and up in through the northern plains, and even some action going on in the upper Midwest in terms of shower and thunderstorm activity. So why don't we take a look at where we're going with the upper air pattern, because at least finally we're seeing a bit of a change here in the east. And we'll start with the European. And what's left of the upper trough, if we go back from earlier this week, you can see how that trough in the east has evolved. That south-southwest flow up the eastern seaboard, that ridge off the South Atlantic coast, the trough gradually weakening as we go into the weekend, and then the upper high in the Atlantic builds back westward into the southeast. So we get some ridging here. in the northeast. And this is where we're going to see some hot weather. And we're going to see a lack of downpour and thunderstorm activity, which is good news because we need to dry things out. So shower and thunderstorm activity, if it happens Sunday and Monday, will be isolated to at worst widely scattered. And then we wait for the next shortwave trough to come into the east. And it's not overly impressive. It's a little bit more impressive on the European than it is on the GFS. At least this would argue that for the middle of next week that we will probably get a bit of a break from the humidity, maybe late next week for a couple of days. And then after that, it's kind of a lot of questions start to pop up in terms of where we're going with the long range. Here's the GFS's view of the upper air. And then we'll take a look at the surface and we'll see what's going on. But here's your trough on the GFS from earlier this week. And of course, weakening the Atlantic ridge, building back westward. It gets hot, stays humid right into the first part of next week. Then we get this troughing in the east, which is much less impressive than the European was. The system that's up in eastern Canada is not as deep on the European is deeper on the European. It's not as deep on the GFS on this run. This is the new run of the GFS, which takes us out to the end of next week. I'll have to go back one run to go out a bit further, and I'm sure we'll probably have a different outcome in the long range. But the ridge wants to build back in the Great Lakes for next weekend and into the first part of the week of August 13th. And then the westerlies try and come down, but it looks like the GFS wants to have some kind of ridging in the east and troughing in the west in its longer-term view. That's going to change from day to day and from run to run once we get past day 7. You guys know how I feel about looking at the models and trying to make reaching conclusions beyond the 6th or 7th day. It really becomes a bit of a dice roll from run to run. So as we move into Sunday, through Saturday on the GFS, you'll notice that there's very little activity now in the east other than some scattered shower and thunderstorm activity. Johnny Quest, you'll get to dry out. It looks like you might actually get a few days without any shower or thunderstorm activity. Might have to wait, slight chance maybe late Monday, better chance on Tuesday, late Tuesday as this cold front works through. That front's going to get hung up somewhat because of the fact that we're not getting a strong push of westerlies to just kind of get that front out of there. So that could open the door to the possibility of some showers and storms for the middle and latter part of next week. We'll have to wait and see on that. The GFS is being very stubborn with trying to get that front through. That was the old run. Let me just see if the new run does the same thing. And here's your front for Tuesday. And it does seem to want to hang it up a bit. So it would at least prolong the chance for showers and storms until maybe Friday. Perhaps after Friday there might be enough of a push to get some drier air in here. And by the way, if you look on the lower left corner, that's another hurricane that it forms off the coast of Mexico and takes it northwestward parallel to the Baja Peninsula, but far enough offshore where there is no impact. And the GFS, by the way, is not really showing too much in the way of tropical storm development, while the European does have a fairly active wave coming off the African coast on day 9 and actually holds it together on at least through day 10, which is as far as it goes. We are not seeing that on the GFS. Here's the radar, the Fort Dix, New Jersey radar out of National Weather Service Mount Holly at 6:22 p.m. Eastern Time. You can see thunderstorms. I'm going to give this a quick refresh. I might be a little bit behind, I'm noticing. Yes, so the thunderstorms from earlier are gone, but we do see scattered downpours and thunderstorms in western New Jersey and in southwest New Jersey and in parts of eastern Pennsylvania. Going to, from the standpoint of severe weather risk and watches and warnings, the severe weather risk map from the Storm Prediction Center. And by the way, we had an EF0 tornado in New York City last night at 10:30. It was confirmed to be a tornado that rolled through about 10:30 last night. It was quick excitement for in my neck of the woods. Now here's the Storm Prediction Center's marginal risk of severe weather through the overnight. Slight risk in a narrow band from east central New York through central New England, and then you have a slight risk up back into the northern plains. A larger area of marginal risk surrounds both those areas. And in terms of watches in the east, because of the fact that we've had so much rain, we have a large area from North Carolina all the way up into southern and central New England. And that includes, by the way, northern New Jersey, New York City, and Long Island, all in flash flood watches. I think what the Weather Service is doing is basically anticipating the possibility of some heavy downpours that will set off some flash flooding. The threshold for most of the area here is very low because of all the rain that we've seen in the past week. You know what? I also want to bring up, let me bring up the, where did it disappear to? I thought I saw it. Yeah, there it is. This is the Weather Prediction Center, WPC, their 7-day rainfall forecast map, which actually has been working out pretty well. You'll notice that we don't have any excessive areas really. Most of the rainfall amounts in the highest zones are in the 2 to at most 2.5 inch range, and this is for the next 7 days across the Gulf states and in a small area up in eastern Pennsylvania and on up through the Northeast. So at least we're not seeing 5, 6, 7 inch rain amounts being spread out over the next week. And by the way, just going back to Hurricane Hector, I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but I'm seeing things and I'm thinking, let me show you this. Look how small it is. I mean, it really is very, very small, sitting out there in the Pacific. It's just kind of rolling along to the west. And this is, we're not talking geographically a system that's covering a lot of geography. There are 2 other disturbances, actually 3 other disturbances behind it that the Hurricane Center is watching for the potential for tropical storm development. But it doesn't look like any of those particular storms will have any kind of land impact. So you can see it was, certainly a lot to talk about tonight. And over the weekend, we'll, of course, update you on the goings-on with Hurricane Hector. Let's hope that southern trend continues and we wind up seeing Hector passing south of the Hawaiian Islands. As we said, it would have to come very, very close for any kind of land impact. Big hello to everybody. Iron Mine 10, College Point, Queens, getting that EF0 tornado last night at 10. Nighttime tornadoes here. Daytime tornadoes are rare enough. Nighttime tornadoes are very rare up this way here in my area of the Northeast. Timothy Veltman, the rain is for ducks, and I totally agree. The Whitney, yes, the Whitney is tomorrow. I'll have to just watch it on TV. I've been up for the Whitney a couple of times. It's a fun day at Saratoga. Those of you who have never gone to Saratoga for racing, for horse racing from late July to Labor Day weekend, you got to do it at least once. It's a great experience. I recommend it highly. If you haven't done it, do it. D.O. Nandkumar, tornado EFZO in College Point, Queens, 75 to 85 mile an hour winds. There was some damage that was reported there. And yes, Reaver 501, last night at 10:30. Actually, my buddy Bill Goodman, who I've had on Skype here on YouTube and also a couple of times on Facebook, messaged me last night about it and told me that from the standpoint of looking at it from the JFK radar, it looked pretty nasty. So it was a very small cell, but it did have impact. And G.W. White 713, with respect to the tropics, correct. The Saharan dust is having big impact and preventing these tropical waves from generating anything in terms of convection. And we could see how anemic the intertropical convergence zone is, and the Saharan dust is playing a big part. And yes, Johnny Quest, I guess by now you've really kind of outdone NOAA with 40 days and 40 nights of rain. the model trends, Dio, at least the fact that the models are all kind of clustered with this southern track for Hector is a good sign that you could get a little bit of confidence that that indeed would be the case. And is the ridge breaking down in California? Governor Jerry Brown making outlandish statements about the heat wave. You know what? They'll make their. You actually bring up a point that I kind of discovered today. So I'm reading articles from the British tabloids and a few other newspapers about the heat wave that's going on in Europe, and it is. It's been horribly hot. One of the things that I'm reading saying that, you know, temperatures in Lisbon are going to 120 and all these like really crazy numbers, and I said let me just check for laughs. Now Lisbon got to 105 today, and that's very hot, but not 120. Okay, so my point is be very, very careful about what you read and the context when it comes to this stuff, because, you know, they're writing these articles. You know, the articles that you're seeing that are being written are, you know, almost intentionally being, you know, the hyperbole in it is just insane. Okay, and you know they're throwing out these numbers. You know, maybe. And you can't even say that that's the feels like temperature if you want to go down that particular road, which you know I'm not a big fan of. But the air there has actually been bone dry. So when you take into account how bone dry the air is, yeah, it's 105, but it actually feels like 100. Now I'm not trying to minimize the heat. It's obviously a very, very serious situation for Europe and particularly for areas that don't usually see temperatures this hot. It got to 84 today in London, but I was reading how they were talking about temperatures between 95 and 100. I didn't see any numbers like that, but just be very careful with what you read and verify it. It doesn't take a lot to just pull up the temperatures that are actually happening and see if they're correct or they're just, you know, exaggerating. Patricia Owens, we just had the most horrific storm and lightning so loud my poor puppies were freaking out, and my daughter at her daycare said her kids were crying. The noise was so loud and the rain was so hard. Yeah, some of these thunderstorms have really developed quite strongly, and yes, they certainly are living up to expectations as far as the severe weather is concerned. Shelly Man Studios, Atlantic City season quiet so far. Well, we've had 3 named storms. The question is whether it's going to rev up soon. We are in the month of August, where normally things do rev up, particularly in the second half. But right now, we've got, you know, the upper air is not favorable. The Saharan dust situation, not favorable. Eventually, it will rev up. I just think that maybe some of these forecasts of from earlier, before the season started, about 16 or 17 named storms. I got to tell you, 14 storms over the next 10 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks, that's not going to be an easy feat to accomplish. So I'm thinking that the high-end forecasts are going to have a real tough time verifying. And the ones that have kind of adjusted back to the lower end may be in a better place right now. Gin and tonic in hand and ready for Joe. Reaver, you got prepared correctly. Now you just need to smoke a cigar with that, and you're all set. Hi to Delvin. I'm going backwards on the chat, so those of you who posted first, I'm getting to last tonight. And those who posted last, I am getting to first. James NASCAR fan just posted here, and we actually... Even Long Island got to see a couple of cells in western Long Island today. The rain along the immediate coast has been minimal compared to what it has been inland. This last round of downpours for late tonight or tomorrow should change it to some degree. I think everybody's going to participate in that as that upper trough weakens and what's left of the energy gets kicked out to the northeast. All right, folks, let's get you going on a Friday night. You probably want to go out and do things. Thank you, by the way. I've gotten a bunch of new subscribers onto my YouTube channel. Thank you for those of you who have just joined the family here. Great to have you on board. If you're watching today for the first time, thank you for being here, and consider hitting the subscribe button, which is absolutely free, doesn't cost you a cent. And we do live streams every day, and some days multiple live streams when weather conditions call for it. And tonight we'll have the Joe and Joe Weather Show on Facebook at 9 o'clock. That could be 15 minutes either side of that. We may wind up going a little early tonight. I know I probably shouldn't say that, because when I do say it and I wind up going later, but figure 9 o'clock and plus or minus 15 minutes either side of that. And my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Cioffi, or Joe Rayo's Facebook page, Joe Rayo Weather. Fear not, if you're not on Facebook, I do upload the Joe and Joe Show to the video library, and it's usually done before 10 o'clock Eastern Time, so you can watch it once we're done on Facebook. It's the first thing I do is put it up on the YouTube channel. Sam M, I'm not big on long-range predictions, but I'm with respect to the hurricane season, but I will say the fact that for what we're seeing right now, it's hard to imagine how we could wind up much above normal. We might have to struggle to have a normal season if we continue to see the wind shear conditions the way they are, and the Saharan dust situation. I kind of tend to think, I mean, at some point we're going to start to see some activity. Watch for the Pacific. The Pacific activity right now is busy. We've got Hector. We've got 3 other disturbances that look like 2 of them at least may become tropical depressions or tropical storms in the next 5 days. So watch the Pacific. When that activity dies down, you'll see the Atlantic finally kick up in a big way. We actually saw that at the end of June when the Pacific shut down. The Atlantic had a brief flare-up with the 2 named storms, Chris and Beryl, the 2 hurricanes. So I think you're going to see the same thing happen when the Pacific starts to die off with this burst of activity we're seeing now. If we continue to see the Pacific churning out one storm after another, then there may be bigger issues at play here, including a developing El Nino, which would limit Atlantic activity. So let's watch to see how that plays out. Okay, so Joe and Joe Show tonight, roughly 9 o'clock on Facebook. Otherwise, catch it on the video library. As always, you got the Amazon link. You can shop on Amazon using the link that's on the descriptor to this video and on the descriptor to this live stream, and also an Ebates link, so you can get cash back on your Amazon purchases, or for that matter, any of the retailers that are on Ebates, and just about everyone's on there. We're participants in the affiliate programs for both Ebates and Amazon, and their affiliate programs are designed to provide a means for this channel to earn fees from Ebates and Amazon, and this is a great way to support what I do here on YouTube. You get your stuff, and Amazon and Ebates throw back me a little bit of coin, and I can get a few cigars to relax with over the weekend, which is what I plan to do. And as far as the weekend is concerned, it's going to be hard to pin me down on a schedule for this weekend because I do have things going on. I will likely do a live stream on YouTube tomorrow morning at some point, rather than do it in the evening. And on Sunday, it is likely that I will also do it in the morning rather than in the evening, because I've got a couple of barbecues to attend to and a few other things happening. So I'm going to make sure I get the live streams on, and my window of opportunity will be during the morning hours. All right, folks, have a great evening. We will see you later on YouTube, or on Facebook, or we will see you over the weekend on YouTube, or possibly even on Facebook too. Bye-bye.